Hello, hello. 4 o'clock. A little bit early today. Oh, once you sign on, let me know that you can see me. Let me know that you can hear me. I'm just gonna check that I'm showing up in all the right places. Excellent. Someone from Facebook has joined us, so that tells me Facebook is working. And it looks like YouTube is also working. Great. So we should all be here. Thank you guys for swapping the time. If you didn't know it about me, I do enjoy football, and I particularly enjoy watching the Seahawks play football. So Monday night, they don't always play on Monday night, so it's usually not a problem. But today they are playing on Monday night, and so I didn't want to choose between you guys and them, so I didn't. Okay. So I have my notes. I have you guys. We are going to talk about kind of the course from your dog's perspective. And this is how I kind of look at, I've always kind of looked at agility, that my my main goal is that I want to make agility as easy as possible for the dog, because I can control my behavior more easily, I guess. I can talk to clients in English, usually our first language, and we can make adjustments from there. So I would rather look at making agility fit into the way they view the course, rather than trying to train the dog to see the way I view the course. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with today's talk, is about looking at it from their perspective, and how can we build our handling system, our communication system, with what they naturally bring to the table, rather than trying to teach them a whole bunch of things to make it easier for us. I feel like we, the human, choose agility. Especially competitive agility, if we're entering competitions, that's for us, not for the dogs. So I need them to enjoy the game to the maximum amount, and I want them to want to do it with me. So again, that philosophy of mine is I want to make it as easy as possible for them. And we're going to talk about how I make those decisions, and why I would make certain decisions. But if you have a question, just drop it into the chat, and I will try and take them as we go along. So let's first talk about, kind of in my head, there's this cue hierarchy, and dogs pay more attention to our physical body language, and we can break our physical cues into different elements. For example, your motion is the most salient cue your dog knows how to follow, right? As soon as the puppy can see and stand up, they follow motion, right? They're following their siblings around, they're following their mom around, they're following you around. Dogs react to motion naturally. They react to it easily. They understand it. You run forward, they run forward. You run backwards, they follow you. You run to the left, they follow you. You run to the right, they follow you. You speed up, they speed up. You slow down, they slow down. You don't have to teach it. They come out of the box prepared to follow your motion. It's our job to reinforce that in ways that work for agility, right? So if we're wanting them to speed up and go past us, we need to use reinforcement strategies that encourage them to go beyond, to go faster than we run. If we need them to pay a little bit closer attention, come in closer to our bodies, then we use reinforcement strategies to reinforce those habits. Because while all dogs will naturally react to and follow motion easily, how they react to motion is going to be individualized for each dog, right? I started agility with Shelties. So sometimes they would tend to like spin and bark at lots of motion. So I would have to reward in ways that produced calm, nice running at my side, slowing down, speeding up based on my motion, and reinforce it in ways that did not produce spinning and barking. Okay, and then I got into border collies, and I needed to reinforce their tendency to follow my motion that did not produce flanking, going really wide away from my path, or curling in and cutting me off, right? So their natural tendencies to react to motion may or may not work well for agility specifically, but you can reinforce it in ways that do. But that does require that you understand how they react to motion and why they react to motion the way that they do. Okay, but they all react to it naturally. They don't have to be taught. They just might need to be reinforced differently so that they react in the way that you want them to react. Okay, so that's motion. That's the most salient one. And if there's ever a question between, and we're gonna talk about more elements soon, but if there's ever a question in your dog's mind about one of the other handling elements, I'm gonna bet that motion is going to, whatever the motion is telling them to do, is gonna override everything else, because it's the most salient. It's the easiest for them to pick up on, and it's the easiest for them to follow. Okay, second one is your position. Your position relative to the dog and your position relative to the obstacles. Okay, this one's kind of easy. The closer you are, if you're really far behind them, the more they're thinking about turning. The further ahead of them you are, the more they're thinking about extending. It's kind of pretty much that simple. The other half of that is their natural working distance to you. So your average normal dog, I like doing this live versus a podcast because you can hear me, you can see me air quote. But your natural working distance is about one step away from you, about 3 feet. And dogs would just naturally want to be about 3 feet away from your side, right? Again, let's go back to them wanting to be next to you is fairly natural. They come out of the box wanting to be about a step away from you. Now we have to look at and observe your dog's natural tendency, because Smack and Shock, they're full siblings. However, Smack is very, very okay with working close to me. If I take off running in a straight line, you can see he's about that one step away from me, and it's no problem. So when I apply that to handling, if I'm here and he's here and I move in, he moves away at the same level, right? So we just move kind of together on the same paths. But then if I do that same thing with Shock, when she's on my right side, she's normal. She looks just like Smack, right? When she's on my left side, she's out here. which means if I move in, she moves away further. So that translating that to on the course means if I am trying to be this close to her when she's on my left, it's not going to work because she's going to move off of me. So that changes which positions I choose to be in on course. And I just have to say that it's a lot easier. No more pets. You have to, we're not petting right now. You go lie down. What's easier is for me to observe that and to know that about Shock and to adjust the way I communicate with her on course rather than trying to change what is in her head. Now, there's also a little bit of balance. I work on it. I work on trying to reinforce her in ways that encourages her to work closer to me when she's on my left. I do it all the time. For instance, when she's on my left, she only ever gets rewarded out of my hand. Her obstacle focus is still plenty high enough. And also, she would still prefer to work further away from my body when she's on my left. So in that case, I have put in quite a bit of effort and will continue to put in quite a bit of effort to reinforce her for being closer to me on that side. But it's much easier for me to just learn that. And that's how I communicate with her. If I need her to be here, I'm going to choose a position that's a little bit further away so that I know when I move, I will be putting her on the correct line. Okay. But again, we have to see it, observe it, and know what to do with it to be able to build a communication system around it. Excuse me one moment while this doggy gets put in their box. And now everyone wants a biscuit. You can have a biscuit. You can have a biscuit. Squeak. You can have a biscuit. Okay. All right. She wouldn't leave me alone. Okay, so one quick comment. I need to see if my dogs have a difference in proximity based on which side they are on. They may or may not. All of my other dogs are perfectly balanced on both sides. She's the only one, and she's the same on Sheep. So she prefers to turn to the left. So when she's on my right side, she's turning in the direction that she prefers to turn in, and so she looks normal. When she's on my left side, she's fighting her natural tendency. She doesn't want to be on the right. She doesn't want to move into that pressure on the right. And pressure. She perceives pressure coming in to be on her right. So she doesn't want to do it. And when I finally figured out that I'm not changing it, both of our lives got better. I don't know if you want these biscuits. They're just like, they're probably not complete garbage. They're probably okay, but they're just crunchy biscuits for going in your box. They're box biscuits. No more biscuits. No more pets. Go on. Shock came for seconds. She's being very good. She would like another one. And smacks under the desk. Okay. Okay, so next we have, motion, position, very natural, very easy for dogs to follow. They're born knowing how to follow those and whatnot. Next we have your eyes, okay, where you're looking. I think over time, dogs have been bred to, they've evolved to watch our faces more and more, right? They have learned through living with us and being raised by us that information comes from our face. So they care where we are looking. And I don't know about you guys, but when I started agility and when I started dog training, everything was about look where you want them to go. And that was advice that I gave for a really long time. And I no longer give that advice of look where you want them to go. Not specifically like that. On the agility course, I tend to look more at my dog and my dog's line just in front of them so that they can always see one side of my face. And so they can always see where I'm looking. So I'm looking at where I want them to be, not where I want them to go next, if that makes sense. And they naturally do this. And when we talk about connection on an agility course, this is 100% only you being connected to them and their line. There is no eye contact coming back from the dog to me, right? It's not a two-way thing. The dog is just saying, great, I know where you're looking. I see where you're looking. I'm going to be there. And now that I know you're talking to me because you're looking at me or at my line, now that I know you're talking to me, they can pay attention to what the rest of your body is doing. That's kind of, obviously I can't ask them, but when I watch how they react to where the handler is looking, that's what I hear them saying is, oh, good, you're talking to me. I can hear you when you're looking at me. I'm going to grab the comments. A dog with no left peripheral vision, and this taught me to handle one side differently than the other. That's a really good point, right? We can't change that they can't see over there. So you have to change your communication system for them. That's really cool. Yeah, so this is some dog. It's often referred to as like the dog's bubble. Most of the time, you're not going to change that. You're not going to change their bubble. You have to just know it, and you change your communication system to fit in how the dog perceives it. Right? They're not being bad. They're not wrong. This is how, when you're standing here, they perceive that you want them over here, or they perceive that you want them here. And then it's up to us to decide if that fits in our overall big picture, which we're going to talk about, I promise. So we've got motion, we've got position, we've got eyes. We don't have to train them to react to any of those things. It's our job to use those three things correctly and observe their natural reactions and then make adjustments from there. Okay, the heavy lifting should be on us. So a little bit more about the eyes. A blind cross, for example, is 100% natural. I can take any puppy, like just no training. If I'm looking over my left shoulder, they're going to start coming to my left shoulder. And if I change and I look to my right shoulder, they're going to come to the right shoulder. They're going to come to the side of the body that you are looking at, regardless of anything that's going on the other side. Okay, naturally. They don't need to be taught that. We just choose to reinforce it so that we can use blind crosses on course. Okay. The next thing that they're following is where your chest is pointing. Okay. So think about throwing a ball in the yard and how they're really good at predicting where it's going to land. And I truly think that is a little bit about where your chest is pointing when you rock back and go to throw it. So they're following it. They always want to be in front of it. Remember, we can't ever really isolate any one of these elements. They're always working together, which we're going to get there, I promise. so that when you're looking over your left shoulder, for instance, your chest points kind of forward and down to the line. So your chest is working with where your eyes are looking all the time. So again, in agility, we can choose to reinforce that, and we can also choose to train it away so that they don't follow it, right? So we always have choices, but the easiest for the dog is to go with what they naturally know. So using your chest in ways that they already know how to react and respond to is easier for them in most situations. Okay. The next on the list, and it's maybe a surprise, but your feet. Your feet are number 5 on the list. And a lot of people think that they are paying closer attention to our feet than they are, but they really aren't. So when we talk more about balancing cues, we can really see how, like, if your motion and your position is not close to the jump, so maybe you're a little bit behind the dog, so maybe you're slower than the dog and you're further away from the obstacle, so then the motion and position that are supposed to be number 1 and 2 are not helping. So then everything else becomes more important. Where you're looking becomes more important, where your chest is facing becomes more important, and then your feet become more important. But if you're right next to the obstacle and you're ahead of the dog, your footwork can be crap and it's fine. But the further away you are, now your feet are a little bit more important, which means your chest is more important, which means your eyes are more important. So everything's on like a rotating scale. Okay. But mostly you should be using your feet for getting yourself going in the next direction as quickly as possible, because the timing of your cues is way more important than what your feet are doing. Okay. Next on the list, second to last, is what your hands and your arms are doing. And honestly, they wouldn't care. They probably wouldn't care what our hands are doing if we didn't feed them or play with them with our hands. And in fact, most dogs don't really like us to be that handsy, right? They don't like hands coming at their faces. They don't like hands coming over their head, things like that. So we teach them to find value in our hands. But on the agility course, we don't really want them looking at our hands most of the time. There are a few specific situations where we can think of that we need them to focus on our hand or come into our hand or turn away from our hand. But in the majority of cases, our hands don't actually mean anything to them, and we don't want them looking at our hands. We want them focusing on the obstacles. Okay. And then the least salient thing to your dog, from a natural standpoint, is your voice, what you say. It's just noise unless you put in the effort to make those noises meaningful, right? We have to teach them. It's not even that English isn't their first language. It's that words, like, they don't have any concept of words or sounds. They have to be taught that. They have to be taught that a clicker predicts food coming. They have to be taught that the word sit predicts this moment that predicts food coming, right? They have to be taught the concept of words or sounds, and then they have to be taught what each individual word or sound means, hopefully through positive reinforcement techniques. But that means it takes even longer for those words and sounds to mean more to the dog than what your motion is doing, than what your position is doing, than what your eyes are doing, than what your chest is doing, than what your feet are doing, right? So we always have to be aware of what all the other cues in our body are saying to the dog before we can expect a word to mean more than those first 6 things. Okay? So that's the cue hierarchy, right? When we're talking about handling, you are that whole person. You are moving, even if it's at a walk, even if it's running full speed the entire time, you are moving. You are positioned somewhere. You have eyes, you have a chest, you have feet, you have arms, and you have your voice. And unfortunately, as humans, we like to use our voice first and then get a little annoyed when the dog doesn't hear us or doesn't listen, or blows us off. When in reality, your body was probably just saying something that your voice wasn't, right? So we tend to focus on, but I said, and you have to really understand that what you said and what you meant, or what you meant and what you said, are not always the same. Okay, so now let's talk about balancing those cues. Okay, because everything works together in balance. Every handling technique, front cross, rear cross, blind cross, reverse spin, German turn, whiskey, anything, any handling technique, and I don't care what name you name it by, because it's all the same techniques, and there's like 3 different dictionaries out there that name all the same techniques. And slight rant aside, if the agility world could get just on one dictionary, we'd have a lot easier time learning this stuff. But anyways, whatever you want to call each technique, because it's just a label for the combination of those cues that we just talked about, right? Every front cross you do has specific lines of motion. It has a specific position that you're going to be in. You have a specific location where you are looking throughout the front cross. Your chest is moving in a certain way every single time you front cross. You have specific footwork that you are using. Your arms are doing something specific. And it doesn't matter what your voice is saying through a front cross, because if you get the first 6 things correct, your dog will follow your front cross regardless of what your mouth is saying. Okay? So every handling technique is a recipe made up of those elements. And what we get to do is we get to combine those elements in different ways to fit the needs of how we want to communicate with the dog. And where things go wrong is when there is a conflict with those handling elements. Okay? A big one is that if you're using a blind cross on a turn, okay, let's just go there. If you're using a blind cross on a turn, let's talk about the handling elements there. Motion in a blind cross is straightforward, and straightforward cues extension. Okay. Your position in a blind cross should be ahead of the dog, and being ahead of the dog cues extension. Your eyes will be looking over one shoulder and then looking over another shoulder. No conflict there. But in a blind cross, because you're moving forward, your chest is facing forward, which will cue extension. Okay. So what happens is and then your feet moving forward, right? Like your feet are just pointing forward. Everything's forward. So everything about your handling elements naturally in a blind cross, what it naturally says to your dog without teaching them, it says extend. So if we use that specific recipe on a turn, there's conflict. And so now the dog has to decide, do I extend in this situation or do I collect in this situation? And if we're thinking about it from the human's perspective, blind crosses are easier on the handler, right? You can continue forward. You don't have to slow down. There's no footwork involved. So yeah, from your perspective, blind cross everything makes your life easier. I don't come from agility from that perspective because I don't want my dog to have to guess, does she mean extend right now or does she mean collect right now? So in my communication system, if I'm using a blind cross, it means extend. And I'm not talking about specialized blind crosses where the technique includes turning information and a head turn. Because again, this is a dictionary thing, but if it includes turning information, it's not a blind cross. Okay, we can talk about that some other time. Listen to my rants and raves about just getting really clear about the techniques, right? So it doesn't matter what you label it as. When I'm talking about a blind cross, I'm talking about running forward, chest facing forward, feet forward, everything forward, and you're ahead of the dog. It does not cue a turn. So we want the dog, you're welcome. Because there are lots of techniques that include a blind cross, right? Turning your head from one side of your neck to the other side of your body. But there was other things involved in that technique that can cue the turn. But that that's for you to understand and to know the difference. It's not for the dog to go, oh yeah, I read the course map. I know this, she meant to cue a turn on this one, so I'm going to collect for this blind cross. Okay, it's not for the dog to figure that out. It's for you to understand how you combine those 7 handling elements into one recipe to create the line that you want. And just like if you say sit, you expect a sit and the dog expects a sit, and then the dog expects a cookie after sitting. If you do a blind cross, running forward, ahead, turn your head from one side of your body to the other, feet moving forward. If you do that, you should expect your dog to extend. The dog should expect that they're supposed to extend, and then the dog should get rewarded for it, right? So it can't be that you have you have the same recipe and expect 2 different cookies to come out of the same recipe. That's really what this is. I could talk about blind crosses versus head turns all day long, and I am going to watch the football game, so we'll do it for another night. And we can also, I'll jot these ideas down, but like choosing what to do on course is a whole nother topic. So I will jot that down for sure. So we have to be in balance. Okay, so let's have another example. If I need a really tight turn, I can be really close to the jump, and which means if I'm really close to the jump, it probably means I'm ahead of the dog, which being ahead of the dog would cue extension. So I need to use my other handling elements to tell the dog to slow down, okay? Because my position, so my motion being ahead of the dog, running fast, and my position being close to the jump is telling the dog to speed up. So I need to use my eyes and my chest and my feet and my arms and maybe my voice to tell the dog to slow down. But what if I'm behind the dog? If I'm really far behind the dog, my position is telling the dog to slow down because I'm behind them. So my position naturally tells them to slow down. So I don't need to use my chest in the same way. It's all about balancing those things. But again, I have to know how my dog naturally reacts to those things and if I am consistently rewarding them for reacting to those things in the way that I want them to. Okay? So this is kind of all for me to say that understanding motion, position, eyes, chest, feet, and arms is so much more important and valuable to me than training a bunch of verbal cues yet. All right. We're going to get there. We're going to get there quickly. I'm going to keep this going. Okay. What else can be cueing your dog on course? The obstacles themselves, right? And this is where I spend the majority of my training, is training the obstacles, so that when I say weaves and the weaves become visible to the dog knows what to do and how to do it and intelligently ignores me. They're like, I'm weaving, I'm weaving, and she doesn't matter to me until I'm done weaving. The same with the teeter, the same with the dog walk, the same with the A-frame, and a little bit with the jumping, but it's another conversation. And the tunnel, right? So the obstacles themselves should be cues to the dog to be like, ignore the handler, finish the thing, reconnect with the handler, okay? The environment, tons of cues in the environment, right? It's our job to try and prepare them for training environments, seminar environments, competition environments, but they're getting information from what's going on around them. If there's timer horns going off, there's judges, there's scribe, timer tables, all of those things, they're also giving cues to the dog. Okay. Your own nerves and your mindset is giving cues to the dog. Okay. So this is something really specific that I think about, that we expect the dogs to perform in the same way from training to trialing. Well, then you also have to expect that you are behaving the same way from training to trialing. And that is a huge focus on your mindset and how your nerves affect your fluency and your performance. So if you're killing courses in training and you know exactly where to be and when to do it and what to do in training, and you are just spitting out clean run after clean run after clean run in training, but you can't put a plan together in competition, well, you're driving the bus. If your behavior changes from training to trialing, so will the dogs, because of all of these cues. If you're cueing things differently, your dog is reacting differently. Okay. And that does include how our verbals sound, right? If you're usually very confident, walk it, walk it, walk it in training and everything's great. But then when you get to a trial, it comes out like a question, walk it, walk it. Hear the difference? Walk it, walk it. If you're asking your dog questions instead of giving them cues on course, they're probably going to answer you with a less than ideal response. Hair is flying. Okay. So your fluency and your consistency is usually the problem, the biggest problem. Okay. So we have to work on that. And I wanted to do this because we've been having a lot of discussions in the group about what verbal cues I need to train and what skills I need. And I'm not anti-verbal. What I am against is putting pressure on you as a trainer and putting pressure on your dog to learn things and to teach things that you don't need. Okay. I want all of you to achieve your goals, and I want you all to be able to do it and go just as linear as possible, right? But if you're going like this, trying to train things that you don't need, you're not going to be able to go this way, right? So we have to look at the big picture of what your communication system looks like and what your cues are going to look like. Okay. And I look at this as when I bring home a puppy, I observe and teach them about that cue hierarchy, right? How do you react to motion? How do you react to my position? How do you react to me looking at you? You know, how do you follow my chest? Do you go away? Do you come in? Do you want to bark and spin and bite at me? Or do you want to go away from me? I need to know how you naturally react to these things. And then you can have a field day with creating, okay, well, you know what? It matters because how fast are you relative to your dog? Because if you're faster than your dog, or you can easily run ahead of your dog, then you can rely on motion most of the time. And motion will be there to help your dog understand these things. But if your dog is wickedly faster than you are, and I think this is what most of us want, right? We want our dogs to be faster than us. So we need to reinforce them and maybe teach them about going ahead of us. And maybe that means on a verbal cue. But if I'm always running ahead of my dog and it's really easy for me to stay ahead of my dog, I'm not going to put much or any effort into teaching them a verbal go on, because I can always cue it with my motion. But if I know I'm going to fall behind and I'm not going to be able to help them with my motion and my position, then I am going to teach them those things, right? Okay. The second thing that I consider when I'm looking at this overall big communication system is the types of courses I'll be running. Okay. And this is kind of interesting for me because it's changed so kind of rapidly with Shrek. You know, when I was bringing Shrek home, most of his foundation work was centered around him running more on an international level, right? Like when I got him, I was like, all right, world team tryouts in a couple of years and, you know, make the world team. And we're going to be just going to the US Open and doing all these fancy events and big courses and yada, 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 yada. Well, now it's like, well, gee, I'd really just like to run at a local AKC show sometime, maybe AKC Nationals. So the things that I focus on him more now, I don't need the same skills for the types of courses that I just want to be running with him now. So this is something that you can look at too, that if you are only ever going to run AKC courses, and you might go to the AKC Nationals, but you really just kind of like sticking close to home and you don't really travel for competitions, do you need to be running or training for those other types of courses? You can if you enjoy it, right? It depends on your goals. But if you don't enjoy it and you don't need it, then you need to get back on your track, okay? Another thing that I look at is the results that you're looking for. If winning, whether it's at a local or regional or national or international competition, if winning is really important to you, then you might require different skills and maybe some different verbal cues and different independent behaviors than someone else that does not care any bit about beating another competitor, winning out over another competitor, right? So the results that you're looking for on paper actually do play a small part in how you're building that communication system, but it's not the first thing that I think about, right? But it is something that I do consider, okay? And then finally, I ask, where does putting extra responsibility on the dog make everything easier overall? Okay. And what I mean by this is let's just take backside sends for an example. If I know that I'm going to be running courses where there are several backside sends, so many backside sends throughout a weekend, and my dog's going to need to be fluent in different types of backsides and different types of backside exits to be successful in the courses that I'm going to be running. But looking at course maps and running some sequences and training, you don't feel like you're going to be far enough ahead or in a good enough position often enough that it would be easy for your dog. So that's when I decide that if my physical cues, if the cues that my dog naturally responds to will not be enough, like 95% of the time, that's when I add in a verbal cue or some other trained cue to override what the rest of my body is saying, right? Because putting that responsibility on the dog to learn that will make their entire experience easier because it will be more clear. Okay. So I'm not going to say only, but my preference for adding verbal to the communication system is when my physical cues cannot be clear enough on a consistent enough basis. Does that make sense? Now, and this is, of course, this is why I teach the classes that I teach, where I start with these handler mechanics to try and get some fluency and consistency of the physical cues first. Because a lot of times, the handlers that I work with, they think that they need a verbal because their dog isn't responding to their physical cues, but really they are responding to their physical cues. They just aren't on the same page. The handler is expecting one thing and the dog is going, that's not what that means. And so we really have to break those things down and ask the dog, why do you think that? Right? Why do you think that that's right? And then we build our communication system surrounding that question. Why do you react that way? So assume the dog is right and go from there and build your communication system around what the dog is perceiving as the answer rather than what you think the answer is. All right. You guys got questions? We got a little bit of time. You've got some great comments going, some little side chat. But I don't think I missed any questions. Okay, so this is basically all to say that your dog already comes to the table with a communication system that they understand. They already bring to the table concepts and things that they already perceive to be true. And in most situations, it's going to be easier for you to learn what they perceive and how they perceive it. So that's going to be easier than the other way around, than teaching them that when you say back, it means take the opposite side of the jump that you're pointing to. It does it does take some time to process, and it's so I get there's definitely something very attractive about just doing what so-and-so does, or just doing what your instructor tells you to do. But one of the biggest things that I've always kind of said is, I would be at a dog show and I would be walking the course and I would see students standing off to the side and they're watching me walk the course, which is great. But then they would ask, well, why are you doing it that way? And I would just say, well, because I'm running smack. And you guys aren't running smack. So why would you do it like it's not about creating cookie cutter versions of the same handling system. I much prefer to start with a fundamental understanding of how dogs understand things and how dogs perceive things, and then build a communication system that you can do consistently. And I like to run. I like to be ahead of my dog. I'm pretty fast. I used to be when I ran courses. I don't know what I look like on course anymore. Probably not as fast as I used to be. It's been a long time since I run a course now. But if I like that, and I don't even know what I was going to say. Completely lost my thoughts. But the communication system that I choose to use with my dogs isn't going to be possible for the next person. Like, we're all unique. We all bring to the table what we bring to the table, and the dogs bring to the table what the dogs bring to the table. So we need to start. So your handling system could all follow my philosophy from the dog's perspective, what the dog perceives first. But then all of those things need to be adjusted for what you bring to the table and for what your dog brings to the table. And that to me is that's the perfect handling system, is understanding. And that's what I do as an instructor, is I just translate what the dog is perceiving. So when I'm watching even your videos, or even in person, I see that the dog landed looking at the wrong obstacle, and I'll say, well, he says what you said was that, and here's why I think that. Okay, so you don't have to be so fluent that you can translate what other dogs are saying, but you can become so fluent that you can go, oh, that's why my dog thought that. Oh, he went there? Well, yeah, I can see why he thought that. That's how fluent I want you to be. I want you to understand dog well enough that when your dog does something that you weren't expecting, you can go down that hole and ask him, why would you think that? And then you guys can work it out together. I really like to compete. Okay. I'm really glad that you guys are finding this helpful. It is my philosophy to make it easier on the dog. You don't have to agree with my philosophy, but if you do, I think you're in the right place, and I can certainly help you with that. There are some things that I do. I go, well, this isn't going to happen, right? There are some handlers that I work with that look, right? This isn't going to change. I can't change the way, right? Like, we all have different bodies and we all have different abilities with our bodies. So there are some things that the handler goes, this is what I bring to the table. I can't do X, Y, Z. Okay, then we do train the dog to understand what you can bring to the table, right? But that's still making it easier, right? Because we're going, okay, this is what I have to offer, and I will offer this consistently. And then this is what I need the dog to do, right? So, but I always go from what the dog is going to naturally perceive first and work my way back up. If I can change the handler, I'm going to try to change the handler first. But some things are just set in stone and I can't change it. So then I do change the dog. Excellent. I love putting pieces of the puzzle together. It is about the dog in front of you. It cannot be about your instructor's dog or your friend's dog or your partner's dog or your previous dog. There were a lot of virtual verbal skills classes offered through COVID Nightmare, as it was something that could be done in a small space. I think it may have created some lazy handling and confusion for the dogs. So maybe, right? Because if you just add in a word and you haven't really thought about how it combines with the other handling elements, because when you're running agility, the only way the verbal by itself can be 100% salient is if you have taught it to the point where you are just sitting outside the ring and it's just remote control agility. Because otherwise, when you start running, your physical cues are going to play a role. I don't know how big, it depends on how well the verbal cue is trained. So if you just start inserting these verbal cues into the physical cue picture, it may or may not work out, because now there could be things in conflict. And remember, when there's a conflict in the cues, the dog is going to go with the things that are the most salient and the things that are reinforced the most, right? We see it often when dogs are learning about independent backsides. They'll just start offering the backside any which way. And it's like, well, that's when it sometimes does get harder to translate what your dog is thinking, because I don't know what they're perceiving anymore. Does that make sense? I love trading too. This is exactly, this is the kind of stuff that keeps me going for sure. And I do love competing too. Would using either or be to see how some of my handling is being perceived by my dogs, and then work on the questions, answers? Exactly. This is exactly how and why I use either or. So having a similar approach to a sequence and then several different exits. It's also how I go about any type of training. So if I'm running a sequence and my dog makes a mistake, like goes off course or usually it's an off course. So I'm running a sequence and my dog goes off course. The very next rep, I will try to get that off course obstacle on purpose. And that's basically me asking him, why did you think that? Why might you be right? And then I can compare those two repetitions and see, okay, at the point of takeoff of this one, my body was doing the exact same thing in both repetitions. So there I can see how you thought that. I try to find folks who are more experienced that always have dogs that look like the way my dogs run and watch how they run a course rather than watch just my instructors. Yeah, definitely if you have someone that has a similar dog to you, but also are they a similar handler to you? Exactly. Reinforcement history. Because your reinforcement history is going to override a little bit. So if you've been reinforcing just a verbal cue with maybe just a neutral position, the dog might be picking up on subtle physical cues that you're not aware of. Okay. So usually when I do add a verbal, I try to have a physical cue that does still support it so that I don't get into too much trouble. You're welcome. I'm glad I could connect some dots and give you some new things to think about. All right, you got another minute or two to drop another question, but this was super, right? I really like talking about this kind of stuff. I can talk about it for a very long time. And so it's nice to get it off my chest a little bit. I sort of have the idea to talk about how to handle errors and how to react to things going wrong in training next week. So let me know if that's something that you're interested in. And I don't know. We'll see. I think I'll probably go back to my my later time, just because I would have normally Like it gets dark at 4. So like 4:30 would be the earliest I could do it on a regular basis. Because like the dogs got shortchanged on the walk trying to get me back here in time. Okay. I will enjoy the game. Thank you. I will see you guys later on this week in the group, and we'll be back here sometime next week for another Monday Musings.